Welcome back everybody to Forza Horizon 5, and today we're taking a look at the 1993 Autozam AZ-1. So Autozam was an offshoot of Mazda that lasted between 1989 and 1990, and they primarily sold K cars. Now K cars were vehicles that were made to specifications set by the Japanese government, so they had to be a certain width, a certain length, a certain height, certain sized engines, and that meant that those who bought them had to deal with less in the way of taxes, and pretty sure it meant that they could, park wherever they basically wanted, whereas other people in larger cars had to pay higher taxes and pay for certain spots to park as well. So there were a lot of advantages to buying such a small car. Obviously it's going to not be very much to run. It's going to be cheap to insure and anything like that, but on the whole these cars were also very innovative to make the most of such a small amount of space. So this was one of at least 3 cars from the period, alongside the Honda Beat and the Suzuki Cappuccino, to really innovate in terms of sports cars. So and the one thing that this has is really rather funky doors, gull wings, something you'd normally see on much more expensive vehicles and not something as cheap as this. Although unfortunately this was more expensive than the Cappuccino and the Beat, which meant that it only sold 4,392 versions, with a further 531 sold as a Suzuki Cara. But the Honda Beat and the Suzuki Cappuccino sold at least 20,000. I think the Honda Beat sold up towards 33,000. So nowhere near as successful as those cars, and that's purely because it was more expensive and quite cramped inside for a K car. So which is a bit of a shame, but still, as you can see, it's got a pretty decent interior for such a small car. Those gull wing doors certainly help make getting in and out easier than it would with a normal door. And as you can tell by the RPM gauge there, this is a very high revving engine on this car, up to 9,000 RPM. And the engine is actually from a Suzuki. It was used in the Suzuki Alto. Suzuki and Mazda collaboration basically. Up front, all you've got is your typical gubbins, your window washer wiper liquid and stuff like that. I imagine there would have been a spare wheel in the middle maybe there. I'm not entirely sure, but obviously with such small wheels you can pretty much fit those wheels anywhere. But the party piece with this car, like the Cappuccino and the Honda Beat, this is I think the Cappuccino was mid-engine, it might not well have been, but the Honda Beat definitely was, and like the Honda Beat, it's mid-engine and rear-wheel drive. And it has a 657cc turbocharged inline-3 engine, producing 63 horsepower and 63 pounds-feet of torque, so not a massive amount of power. But then obviously you're dealing with a very small car that only weighs 1,587 pounds. So you don't even have that much in the way of weight to haul around, as was the norm with K cars. Obviously being small, you're typically going to weigh a lot less than you would a normal size sports car. So you take into consideration like sort of a Pontiac Fiero, for instance, from the mid-80s, much bigger car, also mid-engine and rear-wheel drive, but weighs at least 1,000 or so pounds more than this. Yes, it has more power, but it's also a lot bigger at the end of the day. So but nonetheless, let's get out onto the open road and see what this car can do. Right, so here we are at the drag strip, so let's see what this car can do before we hit the speed camera, and then we'll get it round the track. So not having all that much power, you'd expect this to be a pretty sluggish vehicle, but to be honest, it's far faster than I ever expected it to be. And with it having 9,000 RPM rev limiter, a 5-speed manual gearbox, it's actually far more lively than you would anticipate, and nowhere near as slow as its horsepower rating would have you suggest. So 92 miles an hour there is pretty damn good for a sub 70 horsepower car, and because it doesn't have much in the way of weight, it's very truckable. It's not got much in the way of body roll, and it's just all round really rather quite fun to drive. And with that 9,000 RPM limit, you really don't feel like you ever need to change up. It's just got so many revs. You can basically think of this as a mid-engine rear-wheel drive version of a Honda S2000 in that regard, because that also had a high revving engine on it. But this, as you can see, is far more nimble than that car ever would be, just because of how little it is and how little in the way of weight, in the way of weight it is, so as well on top of that. So yeah, so let's see what it's like in terms of stats. So rivals, we're in D class, mid D class. So yeah, those are the stats. So pretty good speed, handling and launch on the go. It's actually a pretty sprightly car off the line, quite frankly. Braking isn't that great, but then given how little it weighs, I don't think that really matters. You don't have much in the way of momentum behind this car due to how little it actually does weigh. Acceleration wise, it's obviously not the best, but again, like I said, it feels a lot better than the stats or the numbers would suggest, quite frankly. So yeah, and for the longest time I've well, ever since the Toyota GR Yaris was added to this game, I always touted that as being a rather unique car in terms of its engine, as that also had an inline 3 engine, but now this has joined it, that's made it a little bit less unique, but no less no worse for the wear having this car in the game with that engine, quite frankly. So yeah, let's hear what it sounds like and then we'll talk about it some more. So yeah, sounds pretty good, especially when you start getting up to the higher regions of its rev limiter, but yeah, it does encourage you to be silly. As you saw there, I did clip the wall slightly, and yeah, it is a very, you know, rambunctious kind of vehicle. It does really make you want to be like an idiot in some regards in terms of driving it, just because it's so agile, it's so truckable, and yeah, it's just so much fun to drive. It just does not feel like any other vehicle on this game, and that's because, yes, it's small and lightweight. There are plenty of those kind of cars on this game, but those cars generally don't have much in the way of power. You look at the likes of the Fiat, the Abarth 595 SE SS, for instance. That's a fairly truckable car, but that has, what, 20 odd horsepower thereabouts. And you know you got your Wuling EV vehicle as well. Doesn't have much in the way of power, but it's also very small and very lightweight. Whereas this has the power to match the lack of weight and its general size, which is really, really cool. And yeah, it does make me want more of these kind of K cars in the Forza game. Acceleration wise, 0 to 16, 10.5 seconds, which is not bad for a car of this horsepower. 0 to 100 in 27.133 seconds. Yes, this actually can do 100 mile an hour, and then some, as it's got a top speed of 117 miles an hour, which is far more than I anticipated. I really did expect it to not even be able to do 100 miles an hour, and yet it can, and then some, and that is really rather impressive. Which just shows how, yeah, its engine isn't being overly used for the weight, and it's got good aerodynamics to cut through the air effectively, and yeah, it just feels so fun to drive. It really does feel like nothing else on this game, and it does really make me want, you know, our next Forza game to be set in Japan, just because of how many, you know, cars that are in that country that have never been sold elsewhere, that we have never had in a game before from Forza, and it would just be an absolute joy to see all of the other kind of vehicles that this would be alongside, you know, like the Suzuki Cappuccino, the Honda Beat. There were all sorts of real ones from the likes of Daihatsu, and you know, so yeah, I really would like those kind of cars to be in a Forza game. But for now, we've got this as technically the only K car that we have in this Forza game so far, which is no bad thing. It's at least good to have at least one, and it is part of the JDM Jewels car pack. So it's a car pack that is focused on JDM cars that weren't sold elsewhere in the world, and yeah, this is comfortably probably one of my favourites out of the car pack, to be honest. It is just that unique, whereas the other three, you know, there are other versions of those kind of cars on the game, You know, we've got a estate car, we've got plenty of those. We've got an off-roader, we've got plenty of those. We've got a front-wheel drive, cute little hatchback. Again, we've got plenty of those, but we do not have other kind of vehicles like this. And yeah, it's a real treat to have on the game, and I highly recommend getting the car pack. If not for the other cars, at least this one on its own. But nonetheless, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.